Hey you guys, it's Peter, and welcome to my channel, Peter Watches TV, where I watch all the television shows, all the true crime, all the reality TV shows, all the trending shows on Netflix and Apple and Peacock and Paramount and Max and everywhere else, and then I come over here and I react to them. And today I want to talk about the new documentary that just came out on Netflix about a week ago, which is called Don't Die, The Man Who Wants to Live Forever. And it's a show that I had on my list for probably the last couple days. A couple people had recommended it to me and said, oh my God, you need to watch this documentary. It's so good. And, but it wasn't a documentary that when I watched the trailer for it that I was super interested in. And actually, I didn't even know that it had kind of like this guy, Brian Johnson, who it's about. I didn't even know that he had this like huge kind of social media following of people talking about him online, and that there were YouTubers and TikTokers and all these people that had been talking about him for quite some time. And all this scandal around him. I knew nothing about him. I never heard about him. I never heard anything about this whatsoever before I watched this documentary. So it was interesting going into it. Now, the documentary, I think, is like an hour. I have it pulled up right here. It's an hour and 29 minutes long. It's interesting. It wasn't the greatest documentary that I've ever seen. It wasn't the worst documentary that I've ever seen. But I think it's interesting in how they did the documentary, okay? And we're going to get to that in just a second. So before we get into that, let me tell you the synopsis for the documentary. It is currently on Netflix. It came out in 2025. It just came out in the last week. And it is about this guy named Brian Johnson. And it says genetic enhancements, plasma swaps, 100+ daily pills. Explore tech entrepreneur Brian Johnson's extreme anti-aging odyssey in this candid documentary. So it's about this guy named Brian Johnson. Brian Johnson is kind of like a tech genius and like owned this company. I think it was called Blueprint, and then they like owned like Venmo and things like that. And then he sold this company, and now he's just like massively wealthy. And he has focused his entire life for like the last, I don't know, 10 or 15 years on the extremes of anti-aging, okay? And the idea of minimizing like the aging on the body, and not just the outside, the physical body, but the internal and the organs and things like that, so that you can basically slow down the aging process. And talks about how, so the documentary goes in at the beginning, and it talks about the whole like theory behind anti-aging, all these scientific studies that are being done about it, that there's this whole scientific area of study all about anti-aging and fighting diseases and things like that. But that's not really what the documentary is about. And I don't know if the producers and the directors of the documentary went into it thinking they were going to achieve what they achieved, or if like it was so subtle, the message that they sent in here. I mean, I was watching at the end, and I have to tell you, like, I watch a lot of documentaries, and like I said, I don't think this documentary is one of the greatest documentaries I've ever seen. And in all honesty, I wasn't even that greatly interested in the life of Brian Johnson and his anti-aging. That wasn't what was interesting to me about it, okay? What was interesting to me about it was his relationship with his son and what he learned from it. And we'll get to that in just a second. I know that there are going to be a lot of people that watch this that are going to be like, okay, number one, this dude is creepy. His relationship with his kid was creepy. Like, everything about this guy is creepy. I think that's a really kind of like simple response to this. I think that anybody that gets interested in any kind of like weird thing, or they talk about him, they kind of make a joke about it, but then he isn't really joking about starting like a cult, and this is a religious thing for him. I don't know. It's like there's so much that goes on in this, and that it's kind of hard to understand. But the subtle message at the end of this, what was so interesting to me, okay, about this documentary. And I was like, did the director of the documentary, like, mean it to be this way? Like, was this a subtle kind of, like, response to the message the director was sending? Because there was a message that was loud and clear to me by the end of this documentary. And it was not about doing all these fanatical things for anti-aging. It just wasn't about that to me at all, okay? And maybe I got some weird take on it. You know, it's whenever you watch a movie or a documentary, or you read a book or watch a show, sometimes at a specific time of what's going on in your life, or, you know, whatever you've gone through, it like hits you harder at that time, or a message hits you harder at a certain time because of that. So it goes in, and maybe that's why, like, the message of this documentary was different from me than maybe what other people would take from it. I don't know. But when I watched the documentary, so it goes in and it talks about this guy. One of the things I thought was interesting was it never once in the documentary says his age. They never once say his age. I thought it was so interesting that a documentary that is talking about a guy anti-aging, never, if I say that and then people be like, oh yeah, at the beginning of the documentary, they said he was 52 or something like that, or 42. I mean, I literally watched the documentary, like just watched it on an iPad in front of me. I don't remember them ever once saying like, his like genetic age is that he is 45 years old, and that his his biological age is like 30 or something like that. They talk about him being like his body is like close to being like 18 or whatever. But they never, like, I don't remember them ever saying, like, he was born in such and such year and whatever. The number one lesson I will tell you is, though, that Mormonism has ruined the world. No, because he's brought up Mormon, okay? And I watch a lot of these documentaries. Y'all know I cover the Sister Wives over here. They're not Mormon, but they come from the LDS Church original. I mean, like, that's the spinoff of their religion is a spinoff of the LDS Church. And then there's the, Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. There's all of these reality shows just about, I mean, the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. I mean, they're just talking about it last week, about growing up in the Mormon church and all this kind of stuff. It's like, there is so much shit and shenanigans that goes on and comes from the Mormon church. I feel like 2024, 2023, and going forward is a lot, okay, about like Mormonism, fundamental Mormonism, and things like that. It's just like, it's so crazy to me. And the discussion of Joseph Smith, at one point in here, Joseph Smith, who started the Mormon church, they talk in here, the founder of the Mormon church, they talk in here about that Brian Johnson kind of his dad said something to the effect of, he kind of wants to be like Joseph Smith. Like, he wants to lead the people in the direction of this, like, anti-aging, this super health. So, and I don't, like, that towards the end of it, they kind of, like, try to turn it into this thing, like he's trying to start a cult. He and his son talk about it. He kind of jokes about it a little bit, but you can also tell that there's a part of him that's kind of like, yeah, like, I wouldn't mind that, as long as I'm, like, leading people to the cult of, like, being, like, healthy or whatever. So what it's about is, it's about this guy, and he's super, super wealthy, he lives in this gorgeous house, and he has left his wife and 3 kids. He's left the Mormon church. None of his, like, two of his kids won't have anything to do with them, and I think it's his eldest son lives with him, has moved there just for the last year of high school. And his name's like Tangent or Tangiers or Tanglet or something. I don't know what his name is. He looks just like his dad, okay? He looks just like his dad. Real sweet kid. And so, anyway, it's about Brian Johnson. He takes like 360 pills a day, vitamins and pills, and then he like is a vegan by choice, and he shows all this stuff that he eats in there, and he works out. He has this, like, rigid protocol of what he does. He goes to bed every night at 8:30, wakes up at 4:30, I think. He gets, like, exactly, like, 8 hours and 34 minutes of sleep. I mean, he talks about the importance of sleep. As I'm sitting there watching the show, okay, now I'm a vegetarian, but I'm not a vegan. I'm sitting there and I'm watching the show, and this guy, all the things he does. I will tell you one thing that this documentary will do. I don't care how healthy you are. It'll make you feel so shitty about how you live your life, okay? I'm sitting there watching this, and he's talking about, like, back in the day. They show a lot of video clips of him, like, when he was younger, before he started on this. He's a completely different person. I mean, he physically doesn't even look like the same person at all. Like, his facial structure, his body structure, it's not just about losing weight and being in shape. I mean, he physically does not even look like the same person. And he talks about how he was really sad and he was depressed. And he talks a lot about how, like, he was being controlled by the mind instead of the body. And that's a huge part of the show, is talking about that he wants to be controlled by the body instead of the mind, because the mind is dangerous and will lead you into thinking that you can have this food or think you can have that food. And it can also be dangerous as far as your thinking and your processing and obsessing and things like that. And so one day he just woke up and he was like, I can't continue to live like this. But his religious journey is a huge part of that too, of him leaving the Mormon church. And so when he does, 2 of his kids are still within the church. And so they don't have a relationship with him at all. And so he's very lonely until his son, Tangiers, I don't know what that kid's name is. He's sweet. He goes to the University of Chicago, which I will say is interesting for those movie buffs out there. I did think it's interesting. This whole documentary was about this guy who's about anti-aging and trying to stay alive as long as possible. And so they kept on talking about what school his son was going to go to, because he was graduating from high school. And they kept on talking about Chicago. And I think that Brian Johnson's originally from Illinois anyway. And I was like, I think he's from Springfield, Illinois. I could be wrong, but I think they showed that at one point. And I was like, what college is his son going to go to? The son seems brilliant. He seems really smart, very nice kid. And so I was like, he's probably going to Northwestern. It's probably where he's going, in Evanston. Well, they pull up to the University of Chicago, which is a fantastic school as well. Very, well-renowned school. But when they pulled up there and they're going through the dorms, my first thought was the movie Flatliners. Did you ever see that with Kiefer Sutherland and Julia Roberts and stuff back in the day? Where they try to bring people back from life? I thought, this is so interesting that his dad is like doing exactly what they were kind of like running experiments about in the movie Flatliners, which took place at the University of Chicago. This is just how my mind works. So anyway, much of the documentary was him going and getting like these like, I've known people in my life, like these super rich guys that have got the, like, what's it called? They've got the shots, the gene shot. They don't go to like some island and off of Honduras and do all this kind of stuff. But he gets these like, these shots and stuff that have never been tested on anybody. And he's taking all these pills and he does everything so that he can live longer. What was interesting to me about that, right, is that when you look at like, I don't know, it's like, he does this one thing where he's like go-karting with this kid, and they're like going around, like, and I'm like, it's so interesting to me that you're like, you will take, he takes a lot of risks for somebody that's not concerned with like trying to anti-age. So, but he's like, I'm going to continue to live my life. Like, it's about the living. It's not about the dying. He's like, I'm not afraid about dying, which is weird that he says that. He says in there that he's not afraid about dying because when you go to the website, I actually just pulled this up. When you go to the website about Don't Die, which is his brand, the first thing it says on here at the top of the website is, we are at war with death and its causes. And he says in there, he goes, I'm not afraid to die. It's not about that at all. He goes, I want to live forever. Well, if I were going to, he talks about how he and his assistant do all of their marketing. I loved her as well. But I know that like this guy is like so highly criticized, and I think there's a lot that was not shown in the documentary. There's a relationship that he had where his ex like sued him. They like just skimmed over that in the documentary, and there was a lot of people, they showed people covering it online. I'm gonna go in and watch some videos on YouTube about that, because I feel like there's a lot about that story that probably shows that he's not that great of a person. But I don't know about that because they didn't show it in the documentary, and all I'm responding to is what I saw in the documentary. But he talks about how they do all their own marketing. If it were me, I would change this website, and I wouldn't put, we are at war with death and its causes. I mean, I would say on here, like, I'm obsessed with living as long as I possibly can and enjoying each and every moment of it, because that's really what it was really about. So he does all this weird stuff. At one point, they talk about Jeff Bezos and how Jeff Bezos had this blood boy, and a blood boy is basically like, I mean, it almost got into kind of like being vampires and stuff like that, and they even joke about it a little bit. That was the thing. Usually when I watch shows like this, especially, I watch a lot of cult shows, when you watch these like cult leaders and things like that, they take themselves so seriously. Brian Johnson doesn't. Brian Johnson, like, he takes what he's doing very seriously, and he is like, lives by this protocol and whatever, but like, even when he's like going on dates with this woman, like he meets online, he tells her, he's like, you probably won't want to date me because nobody can, like, I'm not that fun to date and you can't keep up with my protocol. I mean, he kind of laughs at himself a little bit. Like, he knows that he feels that what he is doing, and I'm watching the documentary, I believe that he believes it. And that he believes that what he's doing is important. I think that he also realizes the ridiculousness of how it probably looks to the rest of the world. That comes across in the show. Like, even his son gets it. They have conversations about what his friends at school think. It's not like he's, like, super defensive about it. I mean, he kind of laughs about it. Do I think there's an element of him wanting ultimate fame over this? Yeah, they show a scene where he's kind of obsessed with, like, the likes and the comments on a video that he posted. He's on TikTok. He's posting all this kind of stuff over there. But at one point, they talk about Jeff Bezos and how Jeff Bezos had this blood boy, allegedly, that, like, he would, like, switch plasma with. And apparently, like, if you get plasma from somebody that's much younger than you, then it rejuvenates your organs and things like that. So at one point, he and his son and his father go, and they, like, he gives his father, who's a part of the show, his mom and dad are both, like, interviewed throughout the documentary. He gives his dad plasma, and his son gives him plasma, okay? Well, they go in there, and of course, you know, why you would think that, he does this whole photo shoot around it. I mean, it's very weird. The way that they kind of, like, depict him and his son in the documentary, I almost kind of feel like they did it in a way to kind of get people talking, in all honesty. Because it seems like a very genuine relationship. But some of the ways that they filmed it, I was like, oh no, they're trying to film this to get people talking about this relationship between him and his son. Like, they're trying to make it into something that it's not, okay? Even like referring to him as his blood boy and stuff like that. Well, then if he's his blood boy, then he's his dad's blood boy. I mean, like, let's just call it for what it is. If you're gonna call his son his blood boy, then he is his dad's blood boy as well, because they all do it at the same time. The dad says it's like this extreme bonding experience that they have between them. Did I think it was weird? Yeah, I thought it was fucking strange as hell. I would never do that. I don't even like having my blood taken. So I wouldn't be exchanging blood. And then the kid and the dad are like talking about whose plasma is going to look better. It's this competition. It's weird and it's fucked up. But what was interesting is, as the show went on, about the halfway mark, I'm kind of like this, okay? I'm kind of like, I'm over this. Like, I'm over all this health shit. I don't really care. Okay, I get it. Like, I live a really unhealthy life, you know? And I probably, I don't know, have 6 more years than me based on what they're showing on this documentary. Like, it makes you feel like shit about yourself, okay? Like, if you watch this documentary, I will say this, it'll motivate you to want to be healthier. It did. It totally motivated me to want to be healthier, number one. Number two, it'll make you feel shitty about how you live your life, okay? But at about the halfway mark, I was like so bored with his like taking photo shoots of himself, and he looked like Tilda Swinton to me. He was like one of my favorite actresses of life. I was like, is he Tilda Swinton's long lost brother? I just was like, okay. But anyway, I was so bored of it by the halfway mark of just them showing him working out and taking vitamins and pills and showing his food. I could care less. I didn't really care. I was like, is this what the whole documentary is about? And that's the part that his son, I don't remember what his name is, Tangiers or Tanglet or something, enters the scene, okay? And he comes to live his senior year with his dad because they have never really had a relationship before. His son is highly interviewed in the documentary, and I think that he's like 17 or 18 at the time that he moves in with his dad. He's like, goes to college, and that's how the documentary ends on his son going to college and them taking him to college and things like that. And at the time that, it's interesting how the director does all this kind of stuff. Now, as a person that watches a lot of documentaries, I watch for this. I watch for the subtle nuances of what they're really trying to say to you in a documentary. And at this point, I was like, this is so interesting that they're introducing the son. Maybe it was like the third of the way through that they introduced the son. I was like, what's... And the son was being really heavily shown. And I was like, if this is really about Brian Johnson and his company, why are they showing the son so much? I didn't really understand it. Him and his dad look a lot alike. They work out together. They develop this relationship together. And his son is interviewed, and basically what his son says is that he started having a lot of questions about the Mormon church. And so he goes and talks to his dad about it, and his dad was like the perfect person to have a conversation with because his dad had gone through the same religious journey, spiritual journey that he had. And so they start forming this bond, and they play ping pong together, and they work out together, and they like eat together. They eat all his vegan meals and stuff together and all that kind of stuff. And so, like, they even talk in there about, like, and they interview so many different people, like journalists and all this kind of stuff, and scientists, and that they say something that's interesting to me about, like, the dangers, like, is he trying to, like, be, like, his son's age, like, be 18? And, like, they say something about the danger of, like, overdoing age rejuvenation. I didn't really understand what they were saying at that part, so somebody, if you understood, explain it to me. But when the son is introduced, okay, then they start heavily showing the son. They show the relationship between Brian Johnson and his father. They heavily show that at that point too. And how he and his father divorced his mom, went through hell, was in jail. He would go visit his dad in jail, stood by him. And then through the years that he and his dad have developed a stronger relationship. Then it shows that he and his son are building a strong relationship. At the end of the documentary, it shows he and his assistant, I love her in this documentary, by the way, that she and him they fly to Chicago with his son to take him to school. And they're going through like IKEA and they're going through Target. When they're in Target, they're like picking out like, linens and, towels and stuff like that. They pass the toy section. Now, Brian Johnson has said that you can't let your mind get in the way of your health because your mind will start, being this way. And emotions are one of the things that stand in the way of your ultimate health. You can't let your emotions get to you. And in this scene, he literally has a breakdown. I mean, he is holding onto his son. Like, he cannot let his son go. His son almost has more emotional maturity than he does. Because his son at one point says, like, you just got me back, and now you have to let me go. Which was, like, a 50-year-old statement. It's not like an 18-year-old statement. That kid has a lot of, like, intellectual maturity. And so that's it. And so you can see that, like, Brian Johnson's having a really hard time letting his son go off to college. And he literally breaks down because they walk past the toys. And he's like, it was just yesterday that you were, like, in this crib and you were a toddler and now you're going off to college, right? And so they show this whole breakdown, and the end of his show is really about him having a really hard time with his son leaving, going to college, and what a great relationship they had, and this bond that they had. And then it goes in, and they start doing these walks, and this is kind of how it ends, with them showing that he has these walks that he does, these don't die walks, and it starts like in Runyon Canyon, and then it goes to like here, and then it goes there, and it goes to all these different places. And watching it, I was like, it starts showing him like wanting to interact with people more. And I'm like, that's what this is all about. Like, this isn't about how long to live your life. Like, I know that that's what this documentary, like, I know that that's, like, at the forefront of why we're selling this documentary on Don't Die, the guy that wants to live forever. But the guy that wants to live forever learned a very valuable lesson. He even kind of admits to it on the show. I mean, he still wants to live forever because he wants to enjoy all these lifetimes with his son, is what he says. But that time that you have with people, that's precious. That's priceless. Those relationships that you have with people, whether you live 30 years or 90 years, it's the relationships, those interactions that you have with people. It's those moments that you have, those simple moments in life that mean the most. You know, and they focus this show on all this genetic research and all this kind of stuff, but the show is really about his relationship with his son and him getting his son back. And him building his relationship and how much that affects his life. He even talks at the end of the show about how social interaction is so important to longevity, and that interacting with people and having relationships. And it really hit me at a point, because I'm at a point in my life right now where I just, like, there's a lot about my life that I feel alone in, you know, and I've talked about that in my vlog and stuff like that. And so when I'm watching this, and he's really, you can tell that the real lesson of this documentary is really about building relationships with people, and the time that you spend with people is pivotal and profound to your life journey. And it's not necessarily about how many years you live, but it's maybe more important about how you live those years, not how many years you live, you know. And all these people, they show all these critics coming out and being like, this isn't what life's supposed to be about, blah, 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 whatever. And he kind of laughs, and they show it earlier in the show. He kind of laughs at it and goes, they don't really get it, and this is, we're fighting disease. And he wants to be the extreme example of this. He does say that. Like, this isn't for, like, everybody to do, but he wants to do everything you possibly can do to show what the extreme example is. But the extreme example that I think he learns through the process is, it's really not about how long you can live. It's really about what you do with those years that you have. And that's really the most valuable lesson that came out of this documentary. And I loved that. I loved that lesson from this documentary, if you see it for that. The rest of it, to be honest with you, was just fluff for me. It was really the story of him and his son that was so, and the story of him and his dad that was so interesting to me. That was what was more interesting to me, but nobody would watch a documentary about that, you know? I mean, they would, a couple people, but it wouldn't get this kind of prestige. And he's known social media-wise for this Don't Die organization. He started branding and selling these olive oils and all this kind of stuff, and now people are saying he's linking everything to Amazon. He's trying, I mean, the man has millions and millions of dollars. He doesn't need to make money off of Amazon links. I mean, that's ridiculous that even people would speculate about that. But, and I'm somebody that covers a lot of that kind of stuff on my drama channel. I even kind of rolled my eyes, like, he's not trying to make $30 off Amazon links. But anyway, I mean, he has this whole social media following, so they had to make it talk about this. But the real story is really about the relationships in his life that are renewed through this process. And that was what was really interesting to me. So anyway, I would recommend this documentary. I think if you go into it watching it from that point of view, I think that there's a huge takeaway from that, other than making you feel shitty about how you already live your life. Or maybe I should just personalize that. It made me feel shitty about how I live my life, because I realized I'm so more unhealthy than I ever thought that I was. So anyway, let me know what you thought about this in the comment section below. I love you guys, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.